Let me just tell you a few things about Tony. He's served as the Cameron County Marine Extension Agent for 39 years. He is BS in zoology from the University of Georgia and his master's in biology from UT Brownsville. He began his career as a marine biologist for the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, and then moved to Texas to accept the Cameron County position with Texas AgriLife Extension and Texas Sea Grant. A lot of his work is with the Gulf of Mexico shrimp industry, and he has been successfully conducting bycatch reduction compliance trainings to reduce the catches of fish and sea turtles. He founded the Texas Red Tide Rangers and also the Texas Coastal Naturals Program, that volunteer group that responds to cold stunned sea turtles and marine mammal strandings and harmful algal blooms. And I believe you heard Shelby Bissett mention those also. And you know, he's our advisor, and a good one. He's won an award at the state level for being the best advisor, as have both of our advisors. So, and he's a published photographer and accomplished artist in Japanese fish printing, which he enjoys teaching others. And his fish prints are incredible. So, thank you, Tony, for agreeing to tell us about the Bahia Grande restoration.
Thank you, Barbara. It's good to be here. It's such a small thing to talk about, but oh my gosh, all the information I found on it today, it's just overwhelming almost. Bahia Grande has been a focus of this area for quite some time, since probably 1980. And Bahia Grande is around a 10,000 acre playa lake bed. It used to maybe go dry and then get flooded again over time, and a lot of salt would accumulate on the bottom of it, and also algal mats. And we have a prevailing southeast wind that would blow debris to the northwest side of these. There's 3 different lakes that make it up, and I'll move on. This is the general location, and you know, I need to make my pointer bigger. Can y'all see my pointer? You can?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I was going to try to make it bigger because you may not be, well, it's all right. So this is where it is. It's if you're driving between Brownsville and Port Isabel, it's probably the second bridge over water that you will cross on your way there if you look to the left. If you look to the right there, you'll see a canal and the ship channel. And here is a map showing it's a Google map, showing the Bahia Grande, and there's 2 other bodies of water associated with it. And the depths are very shallow. I think it averages around 1.5 feet deep on average. So it's not very deep at all. And you know, the evaporation rate that we have here in the valley is around 60 inches. This is a shot from 1995, and you can see it was a dry lake bed. And we had real problems with dust coming off of that because the Port Isabel High School and other areas to the northwest of it would get smothered in dust. Laguna Vista, Bayview would even get dust, and it would affect the citrus crops there. And it affected people's health. You can see right here the scar going across the main body of water. That is an old railroad trestle, and I'll talk about that in a little while and show you some remnants of it. In 1884, they surveyed the Bahia Grande area, and it was a lot. Well, I guess, I don't know if they didn't have satellite for sure, but they did go around it, and they found Bahia Grande, but they didn't identify it as one body of water. I think they called it the whole thing San Martin. It's a little different now, and I'll show you some more satellite pictures in a minute. But this was a pretty good map, really. And I had heard old timers stories from sailing vessels that would come through Brazos Santiago Pass and sail up almost to Brownsville and unload passengers. And I think this Ignacio Trevino's place may have been the spot that they could have unloaded passengers, or possibly over to the west, over in here. I'm not sure, but I couldn't believe it because most of it now is filled in with clay and sand. So how do these lakes form? Well, I read some about an article that the state geologist published back in 1984, and he was talking about Bahia Grande, and he said that it was a lake that formed from the floodwaters of the Rio Grande, that there were two outlets from the Rio Grande, and the water between them would accumulate, and that's how Bahia Grande formed. And then during the hot period of the season with high evaporation, the water would evaporate out. And if you go look at this, you can see the prevailing wind direction in our area is from the southeast, and it would pile up. This would be the lagoon down at the bottom right. When everything would dry up, the algae, the salt, small clay particles, and sand particles, they would blow to the northwest and accumulate there. And if we look at, and they get up to 15 meters high. I think we've got some around 30 feet, which is about 15 meters high, that are around some of these lakes in the Bahia Grande complex. And this illustrates it very well. If you see all these white lines, that's probably actually salt showing up. But you can see this is a high area here that accumulated salt and dust and sand, and then all these other areas. Laguna Larga is an excellent illustration of it. If you ever drive out there, I don't know, have we had any field trips out there yet, Barbara?
Not yet. We're working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife on that.
I'd love to go out there because I've spent a lot of time over the past 30-something years out there. So Laguna Larga, it really accumulates a lot of salt on this northwest corner. And this is a very high ridge right here, and that's probably 30 feet tall. And then there's another smaller lake or lagoon called Little Laguna Madre, and there's another ridge there on the northwest side. So that's typical of a playa lake. You can really see the accumulation of salt along the old railroad trestle that crossed the Bahia Grande. And this, above the A and the H right here, is called Bird Island. And that's where pelicans used to roost, but now they're roosting, I think, on this area here, the old trestle area and the Bird Island, and maybe a little one over here to the, I guess that's to the west. So during droughts, that's when we have a lot of blowing dust. This is a picture that I took, I think it was in 2001, of the mouth of the Rio Grande. And you can see it stops at this sandbar. This is Mexico, where all these vehicles are. And I think this person here may be in Texas. There's a person way in the background. I don't know if y'all can see that. But it just, and it really shocked me just to see that, because rivers are meant to flow to the sea, I thought, and it didn't for quite some time. Some people went out and dug a trench in there and finally started some flow going, but it just took a big push of water coming down the river. We use most of our water in the Rio Grande for agriculture, but the Rio Grande would, when it would really flow and flood, it would send water to Bahia Grande before we had any dams or anything to block the water. If we had a big storm, the whole valley would flood. It's just I've read several articles or several scientific papers on it, and in fact I talked to a guy that flew over the valley after we had two storms in 1933, and he said the whole valley looked like a lake. He was flying for Pan Am then. Pan Am was a very young airline, and his name was Gene Nations. So this is how clay dunes, or this is an example of some clay dune formation that was caused by evaporation. Many of you are probably familiar with the South Padre Island Golf Club. Well, there's an area called Rio Vista Lagoon in here. In fact, you can drive over part of, or around part of it. If you drive just past the golf course, you can turn in and there's a road. Can't really see it very well. I think it goes, oh, here we go. And it goes back on this side of this lagoon. But you can go back there toward, you can drive back toward Holly Beach. Holly Beach is right in here. And you can take a look at this area. Very high ridge here, another high ridge here, and one more in this area. This one they said may have been formed by northers. Some of the dust blowing off. I guess the Laguna Madre must have varied in its level, had been lower at those times. So the first inhabitants, who were they? They were there. Oh, I've heard some of the talks to the master naturalists lately, and they're saying that the Coahuiltecans or Coahuiltecans were here maybe 10,000 to 5,000 years ago, on up to the 1800s. And they're also known as the come crudo because most of the food that they ate was raw. Christina gave a talk on all the edible plants and fruits that we have here. That's probably what they consumed. And they like to tattoo themselves too. All the pictures that we have are drawings of them, and writings about them talk about the extensive tattooing that they had on their bodies. I even read one description where they said that one Indian brave or native brave could run down a deer. And I've seen deer run, and that seems pretty fast. It's awfully hard to believe, but you never know. Their diet, they ate mostly what they could catch, snakes, worms. Christina talked about the prickly pear, the tunas primarily. They even moved their camps when the tunas were in bloom to certain areas to harvest the fruit of the cactus. And they ate insects. One of the guys or Spaniard that documented the Coahuiltecans was Cabeza de Vaca, and his ship got wrecked on the coast near Galveston, and he walked well over 2,000 miles all the way to Mexico City. He was a slave for the natives and of the natives, and then he became pretty much like a medicine man after a while because he could help them deal with some of their sicknesses. And he wrote a book, La Relación. I haven't been able to look it up yet, but I'm going to try to read it because he spent so much time with them. Some of the archaeological finds in the Bahia Grande area were pieces of shell. They didn't find these particular gorgets there, but they did a dig several years ago on the northern side of Bahia Grande on one of the ridges, and they had to dig down about 1 meter, I think, and they found a lot of fish ear bones and a couple of dart points and also some pieces of shell, and they suspect it was a 5,000-year-old fishing camp. And they didn't always live there because the tribes moved and followed the seasons, what was being most productive at that time. One thing I heard they found was a shell that had some of the tar ball material inside it with a wick, and they used it, I guess, as a candle. That I don't know if you've ever burned a tar ball on the beach, but they sure do. They really catch fire and burn rapidly. But it's interesting to know. This is a state shell of Texas, and that is the lightning whelk. And these particular gorgets, which were worn on their chest, were made from lightning whelks. Later on, in around the 1850s, I mentioned that we had a railroad trestle built over it, and it was constructed from hand-hewn cypress. And you can see one of the pilings here in this picture, and it was actually pointed or shaped with an axe. You can see the axe marks in these, and there's 4 or 5 of them at the Port Isabel Museum. Behind the Port Isabel Museum, they form, I guess, a circumference of a small garden. And this crosses the whole Bahia Grande, and it was built in 1850, and it was a narrow gauge railroad that ran between Port Isabel and Brownsville, and it was modified a certain time, and it lasted, I think, into the 1950s, I believe. I'm not sure, but in any of these dates that I give you probably aren't completely accurate because I'm doing this from memory. Another vehicle that was used extensively on the Bahia Grande was the Port Isabel scow, and it was a sailing vessel, and it was called a sloop because it had one main sail on it, and it was used primarily for transporting cargo and fishing in the Laguna Madre. Commercial fishing was established probably maybe in the early 1900s, and the vessels would sail and surround a school of, say, redfish with a net called a seine. I don't know if any of you ever seined on the beach. We may do that on a field trip sooner or later. But what you do is you drop a wall of netting around the school of fish, and they usually use 2 of these vessels to do this. And how did they get to the Bahia Grande? They would probably leave one of the places in Port Isabel. I just picked this one out, or they could have come off of this area. These are the fingers during that time. The fingers probably, well, it may have been there, and I think they built the fingers in the 1930s, or they could have sailed out of there. And these are sandbars, but they could have come in and gone through some of the channels and then moved in. And this is called Paso Corbinas, which means Redfish Pass. And they would go in, and 2 vessels would surround a school of redfish. This is called redfish, or not redfish, I'm sorry, Redhead Ridge, which is named after redhead ducks, because they used to do pass shooting on this ridge when the ducks would fly toward San Martin Lake, which is down here. You'll see that in a minute, to get to fresh water. Sometimes Bahia Grande would have fresh water, sometimes not. It depended on if there was a recent flood or a recent, I guess, storm surge. It would be salty, but if there was a flood from the river, it would be more fresh. It changed quite a bit. This is I guess, an example of how they surrounded a school of fish. Obviously, these aren't sailing vessels, but that's the only depiction of this method of fishing that I could find. This was a purse seine, and they did not use purse seines in the Laguna Madre. These purse seines would actually close up and form a bowl, like you could see. Well, you can't really see it here, but so these just surrounded the fish. And I have one of my shrimpers, his father had a fish house in Port Isabel, And I guess one of the captains of a sloop came in and said, hey, there's a lot of redfish out there. Would you buy some? And so he said, sure, I'll pay you a nickel a pound for them. And the guy went out and he came in with 10,000 pounds. And his name was Bernie Burnell. He was also the mayor of Port Isabel at one time. Ed Mesa, you probably know something about the history of Port Isabel. And so the fisherman, he said, well, can I go get you some more? He said, sure. He went out and caught another 10,000 pounds. After that, Burnell wouldn't buy any more because he had flooded the market. But an interesting story, there were that many redfish out there at that time. And in Bahia Grande, which eventually dries up occasionally, or did dry up occasionally. This is a life-size model of one of the Laguna Madre scows. It was at the Rockport Maritime Museum. A guy built it from memory. You can see that it's extremely, very, very little freeboard on it. And this dagger board would actually pull up into the vessel so that it could go in extremely shallow water too. It's gone now because Hurricane Harvey took it away. I threw this in there because this is Port Isabel, a depiction of Port Isabel back in I guess, before it was a very big town at all. And you can see some of the Laguna Madre scows in the far background, some of the sails from them. And there's two of them, so they were probably trying to surround a school of redfish. The Brownsville Ship Channel was completed in '36, and also the Highway 48, maybe in 1950. I'm not sure. I'm just doing this from memory. There were only a few culverts from the ship channel to the Bahia Grande. There was just it was very shallow. It was like a ditch. And the culverts actually broke around the 1960s or 70s. So not much water would go in and out from the Brownsville Ship Channel. And it would dry up a lot, quite a bit. In 1929, this is what the wetlands looked like in the Bahia Grande and the San Martin Lake complex. Remember, they called the whole complex here the San Martin Lake complex. And you can see this ridge was probably that bottom area, or this high ground here on I guess the 1884 map that I showed you earlier. So you can see that we've lost a lot of wetlands. This is what's left of San Martin, and maybe some of this too. And San Martin accepts most of the drainage now from Brownsville and Rancho Viejo. So it drains quite a big area when we have heavy rains. The Bahia Grande does not have hardly any drainage in it at all. It gets water now from the Brownsville Ship Channel. And this was in 1983, but it hasn't changed much since then. There was a question. What was that? Barbara, I saw a question.
Are there any thoughts of getting the wetland back?
Yes. Oh, the San Martin or Bahia Grande?
I'm not sure.
Huh.
Nadine, which one did you mean?
Both.
Or both?
Both, just to get the area back to where it used to be.
Well, Bahia Grande, this is about the restoration of Bahia Grande, and you'll see how far we've come along since then. And San Martin is pretty much set, I guess, as to what it's going to be now. Since it is a drain, it also accepts water from a plant a desalination plant Have y'all ever seen the desal plant on the way from, I guess, on North Brownsville? So it sends salty water down I guess, a small canal to the San Martin area. So salt water or fresh water coming from Brownsville and salt water coming from the desal plant mixes in there, and then it drains into the Brownsville ship channel. There's another area further to the southwest that we cited the manatee in recently. I think, did Shelby Bassett talk about the manatee?
Yes.
It recently passed from all the cold water or cold weather that we had, but it was seeking some fresh water that was draining from the Rancho Viejo floodway from some of the recent rains that we'd had a while back. So here's a good depiction of it. My son did this when he was going to UTB, and it shows the way it was right here and the way it was, I guess, probably in 2003 or 4, probably. So I'll stop it. Oh, no, I can't stop it. Oh, no. Yeah, I've lost control of it. But you can see all the wetlands that we've lost over time. And when you lose wetlands, you lose primary production. You lose all the production that results from that. So we lost shrimp, we lost fish. And some of the early biologists that worked on the Laguna Madre wondered whether, because it was producing more fish than any other estuary in the state of Texas at that time. And they thought, well, what they're doing now, they're going to hurt themselves. And we don't produce as much as we did in the past. Here's San Martin. One of the neat things about it is the oyster beds. And oysters are natural biofilters. And there's one, I've got that one covered. Let me see again. Yeah, there's another one here. And they take up a lot of area. And so they filter a lot of the water that's loaded with nutrients coming out of the Brownsville area. And Dr. Hudson Dio did a study on it. I can't remember exactly how much, but I think they removed maybe 1/3 to 1/2 of all the bacteria and nutrients and algae that comes out of that area. So that's extremely interesting that they work so well as a biofilter. And these are mangroves in the back here. I took these when I was kayaking back into there. We actually put in a kayak trail. If you go in this direction, you go back to the park that launches off of Highway 48. And this is going like to the north. And then it curves around and then goes into another mud flat area. There's a small canal and then a mud flat area that has a lot of tires in it from washing down from Brownsville. But those tires, they have oysters growing on them. So they've established their own like little ecosystems in there. It's really interesting. So the Bahia was ephemeral for 70 years or more because of the construction of the ship channel and Highway 48. You can see some dust blowing off. This is when some of the water was, I don't know if it was evaporating or had just gotten some rain, but you can see an example of one of the dust storms that would kick up off of there, and then it would blow into those other little cities to the northwest. And you can, this is the trestle along here. So we're looking north toward the trestle. This is a remnant of I think that may be a mullet or a redfish that was left over from the last time it dried up. And I think around 2004, a storm dropped a lot of water into Bahia Grande, and then it just kept evaporating, and the fish were doing well. These are mostly all redfish in here. And we had like 200,000 dead fish in Bahia Grande after that. This is a satellite. I'm going to talk about the restoration now, but this is a satellite shot from when it was dry. And here's another one from when water had filled it up. And you can see the little Laguna Larga and little Laguna Madre too had water in them at that time. So the Brownsville, Port Isabel shrimp producers decided they wanted to flood Bahia Grande, and they worked with lots of different people to do that. The county, they talked to the county. Judge Ray Ramon was the judge at that time, and they applied for a grant, but I don't think they ever got a grant to do it. And Joe Gaiman, I knew him well. He took me out, I guess in 1982, he took me driving across Bahia Grande when it was completely dry. We got toward the middle and it got very soft, so we had to turn around and go around to a drier area, but it was quite an experience. And he wouldn't stop. In fact, he financed the digging of the first canal that was about 10 feet wide in 1983. He paid $3,000 to a guy. This is Joe Gaiman here when he was very young, a lot older now. And this is Wally Reed. He was a rancher that ranched the Bahia Grande area because it was privately owned, all the upland there. And there's like 10,000 or 12,000 acres of upland. He grazed cattle on it. So they flooded it. And the engineer at the port, his name was Ursel Lance, he didn't think water would go in there. And so Joe had the ditch dug, and here it is. And this is looking toward the south from Highway 48 at that time. You know, there's a big bridge there now, but this was just a couple of culverts underneath it, 3 culverts, 148 and 2 30-inch culverts underneath there. And this is where the area where they came out. You can see they had some problems with some of the, some of the rocks that were in the area. But this is looking northwest, and you can see Bahia Grande has a lot of water in it. And he called the engineer, and it took, I don't know, about maybe a few weeks to fill it up. And he called the engineer and he said, "Look, Ursel, it's a miracle. Water's flowing uphill." And it did. It was productive. Crabbing during, I think it was April. And if you want to go catch some crabs fishing there, you can fish with chicken necks or little crab traps or the round little nets, and just use any kind of meat. Rotten. The more rotten it is, the better it is. And these are blue crabs that grow in there, and they're delicious. The name of the blue crab is Calanectes sapidus. Calanectes means beautiful swimmer, and I think that's Greek. And sapidus is sweet in Latin, I believe, if I can remember that correctly. But during April, they were catching a lot of these. In fact, we pulled a seine, Joe and I did, in Bahia Grande, and we caught some baby shrimp, they're called post-larval shrimp. We took them to an old timer. His name was Lassane, and he was in the port of Brownsville. And he must have been like 90 years old, and we had him in a cup, and he looked in there, and a huge tear just appeared in his eye because he was so happy that the Bahia Grande was producing all this wonderful, the shrimp and the crabs, and I'm sure there were a lot of fish in there too at that time. So after a few months, though, they were told that they had to close it up, and it was really sad. Sooner, I guess, it took maybe well over a year, but it did dry up. We lost more fish, and nothing. Well, people worked on it. I think the General Land Office picked it up, and finally, around 2005. A bunch of different organizations were working on it. And in 2000, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I believe, had had acquired it, the property from the private landowners. One of the issues between that in that time was when the shrimpers were digging it, the landowners that owned it were worried that if Texas water flooded into it, whether they would lose their mineral rights or their property rights. But it was ruled that since it was a man-made channel that they wouldn't, but they were still concerned about it because at one time it was state property, I guess, who knows? And so this is the story of the partnership that happened during that time. You can see these different, Cameron County was involved. CCA was even involved in it. So there was a pilot channel constructed and it was about, I guess, maybe 30 feet wide. They said 60 feet, but I think it was probably more like, well, if you've been there, well, not recently because they're enlarging it again, but they broke it open in July of 2005, and Bahia Grande flooded again. In fact, they even dug channels into these other systems, other lagoons around it, and they filled up with water. Quite a success story. They wanted to do some other cuts in here. They wanted to go through what we call Bahia Ancha, which means the old wade, I think. Ancha is old and Bahia is to wade in Spanish, if my Spanish is correct. But this has not happened yet. And they also wanted to connect an area over in here, I think, right in here, but this is all private property so that we could, when we have northers, that water could flow through this particular one, the Laguna Larga, and into Bahia Grande proper. And then they wanted to also connect San Martin, but a lot of the water coming down San Martin has high bacteria loads, like I mentioned before. Even though the oysters take a lot out, there's still more nutrients and such in it. So they pretty much said, nah, we're not going to do that. So they made a larger cut here into the Brownsville Ship Channel. And then here's a couple of, I guess, maps that were done beforehand. This is one from 1929, and you can see the ridges from that were formed from the what they call ablation or deflation of them when they would dry up and get scooped out by the wind. So here is I guess this was the channel before the bridge was constructed that TxDOT made. TxDOT made a 200-foot bridge over here, and I'll talk about that later. This is a shot of a little Laguna Madre, picture of that, and you can see it's holding water, and I don't think any of these have dried out yet. UTB got a chance to study it from the beginning, so we did. I was going there at the time. I was working on my master's, and so we pulled nets in there. That's my son Anthony. He was a lot younger then, and we would catch a lot of little fish. These are fundulus, and this one is a small mojarra, I believe. And then people started fishing there. Wow, did they start fishing there after a couple of years? In fact, when we had red tides, it seemed like the fish that were in the Laguna Madre would swim away from the red tide and swim into the Bahia Grande. It was a refuge. But fishermen cannot go past a certain line. I think this is a marker here and another marker there. So you do not have public access to it, only along Highway 48. And it's really sad because they promised us, I guess the Fish and Wildlife Service did early on, that we would have boating. Well, you'll see some of the things, some of the promises that they made. It's an extremely productive area. These are some of the fish that they catch in it. Oh, and it serves as an estuary too, because fresh water goes in and then it mixes with salt water, forms a saltwater wedge. And so that lower salinity attracts a lot of fish that like the lower salinity. So this is a redfish on the bottom, a flounder in the center, and a spotted sea trout on top. Spotted sea trout, I think their scientific name is Cynosian nebulosus. Does anybody know what nebulosus means or can refer to? No answers?
No.
Thoughts?
Anybody?
How about a nebula? Yeah, that's close enough. So it's got a name that makes sense anyway. This is the most popular sport fish in the southeast United States, except for red snapper offshore. This is the inshore one. Flounder, I love them all. They're really good. They're delicious. They're a renewable resource. And Texas Parks and Wildlife does a great job managing them, except for flounder because it's being affected by climate change. And I didn't believe in climate change years ago, but now I've seen what it does. The flounder, like colder water, our ambient water temperatures in the Gulf have gone up over the years. And so the flounder population has gone down extremely low. Every once in a while, we'll get a bump in the population. Parks and Wildlife had to come up with regulations now to eliminate gigging for them at certain times a year, even people fishing for them, I think, during, I believe it's November, I'm not sure, but you can check that and see. Redfish, you can tell them real easy because they have a spot on their tail. They don't look very red to me, but I don't know how they got the name. Snook, that's one of my favorite ones to catch. They fight like crazy. They shake their head and they've got very sharp preoperculums, like razor blades almost. You have to handle them very carefully. And I've tested all these particular species for mercury in our area. And all of these are really low unless they're really giant fish. This snook was one of the lower ones that we had when we tested for mercury. So you saw a lot of people fishing on the shore there of Bahia Grande. This information came from probably maybe 2012 or so, but this is what marine recreational fishing provides to our economy. 45.3 million in output. That means sales in the value of goods and services. So that means guides, fishing reels, rods, bait, you name it. And shore-based fishing trips accounted for 62%. That means all those people that were fishing on the edge of Bahia Grande, they are putting a lot of money into our economy, more than the offshore people, which that just blew me away because you see all these huge boats, big motors, expensive tackle, and it's the shore-based anglers beat them out. Shrimp. Shrimp is extremely popular as a seafood. I think it's the most popular seafood in the United States. Well, they depend on our bays to grow up in. They spawn offshore. The female, she lays about 500,000 eggs to 1 million eggs. And they go through metamorphosis. What else goes through metamorphosis? Butterflies. So it's interesting. They don't look like shrimp when they come out of the egg. And then they hit what they call the post-larval stage, which is E. They look more like a shrimp then. And they depend on the tides and currents. The shrimp right now, during this time of year, they are laying their eggs offshore right now. The females are. And within, I guess, within about a month, they'll be moving in. They'll depend on the southeasterly breezes and the currents to take them in. This could be South Padre Island, and this could be Brazos Santiago Pass, and Boca Chica would be here. So they move in, and they like to hide amongst the seagrasses and grow up. And in 4 to 6 months later, they go back offshore, and they get larger and larger as they get further offshore. And it's an annual life cycle. It's pretty much our only annual seafood crop that we have. And last year, our fleet out of Brownsville, Port Isabel landed $47 million worth of shrimp. And that wasn't as much. I've seen as much as over $70 million worth of shrimp landed by our fleets. One of my jobs is to check them for their efficiency in reducing bycatch, and they're doing a good job at it. They've reduced fish bycatch by 30% and sea turtle bycatch by 97%. So they're doing a great job. These are the 3 different commercial species that we have. And all of these come into our bays and estuaries like the Bahia Grande. This is a pink shrimp. And the way you can tell this species very easily is see the spot on its side. All of these get up to about the same size. And this is a brown shrimp. This is the most common species that we catch, that our fleet catches here in Texas. The pink shrimp and the brown shrimp, excuse me, they are nocturnal species, which means that during the daytime, they bury up in the substrate. And during the nighttime, they come out and feed. We have an area off of Port Mansfield where there's more pink shrimp because we have sandier bottom in that area. And that's interesting because, I just thought of it, the sand sheet that we have off of, I guess, if you go west of or northwest of Port Mansfield, the Aeolian Plain has formed in that area. So that makes sense. There's a lot of sand out there, and it gets blown in by wave action and currents. In fact, it filled up part of the Laguna Madre that was open at one time. I think there was a hurricane in the 1800s, they say, where it crossed over. And then if you've ever driven up the King Ranch, I may have talked about this before, if you see those sand dunes that are moving across the King Ranch and the Kennedy Ranch too, those are probably a result of the sand that was blown onshore because there's 2 currents that collide. There's a northerly littoral current. We have a northerly littoral current here in the south. And if you go to Corpus Christi, it's coming from the north. Ours is going toward the north, and theirs is going south, and they collide off of Padre Island National Seashore, and it may move back and forth, but I believe that's what supplies all the sand for that sand sheet, because when a current stops, all the suspended material drops out. When it drops out, it washes up on the beach, and there you go. You have a good sand supply that nourished the sand sheet or the Aeolian Plain. The white shrimp is another species, but it is a diurnal species. You fish for that during the daytime. One of the easy ways to tell it, you see that green flash on its tail? They've got a lot of green on their tails. The other ones don't really have that. And the brown shrimp and the pink shrimp, they have a groove down the top of their head, but usually if you go to a market, you're not going to see that. We also did gill netting in the Bahia Grande when it was first flooded. That's my son, and he's running through 1.5 feet of water with a small outboard. And we did gill nets. We caught all kinds of things there. Trout. There's a trout. One of the first things we caught were a bunch of triple tails. And they were really ragged looking. You can see that their fins are beat up pretty bad. We don't know what, maybe they were running from something, but when we caught them, we let them go because they get a lot bigger than that. This is one we don't really know what it is. Couldn't figure it out, couldn't identify it. I've asked a lot of fisheries biologists what it is. A mystery fish that's from Bahia Grande. If anybody has any idea, let me know. There's also rocks in Bahia Grande. On the southern let's see, on the southwest side of it, there's a layer, and you can see the layer. You can see some of the rocks sticking out. All of these have fallen out, but it's covered with silt. And they think that it was formed by evaporation. And I forget the name of the rocks. I'm not a real geologist at all. I'm a biologist. But it's very light rock. It probably covers maybe a quarter of an acre in this area. I don't really know how far it goes in, but you can see it runs along the shore. And it has some little, what looks like bubbles in it too. Is anybody a geologist here? No. And these are some, how far have I gone? I'm talking fast. This is just some shots that I've taken over the years. I think this is from an overlook on the, if you go into the Red Gate, which is on the northern side, not the northern side, but off of 48. If you go in that way, you get a pretty good view of most of the Bahia Grande. You can see the trestle here way in the background. And it's probably about 20 something feet. This is one of the channels that they cut into, I think that may be the Little Laguna Madre, one of the smaller ones. And they actually use shrimp netting to stabilize the banks on it. And plants started growing through it. So that's a really unique use for shrimp netting. And these are some of the old demarcations of the private property. Birds use them to roost on. And you can see the, I don't know it's probably, maybe Laguna Vista's water tower or Port Isabel's. Another look at the rail, the old rail that used to go across there. This is on the the southwest side. And then it goes to the northern side over where it goes across the Bahia Grande. This is Bird Island. When the pelicans used to roost there before it was flooded. After it was flooded, they roost here and along the area that was covered by the railroad, because a lot of silt accumulated along that. Plants grew and the pelicans are roosting there now. One of the problems that resulted from the Bahia Grande being flooded was they built a bridge on it. And after they built the bridge over it, during a strong wet norther, pelicans would start falling out of the sky. A lot of master naturalists and coastal naturalists have responded to this. There's been over 2,000 pelicans hit the highway trying to cross over, because turbulence is caused when the wind crosses the barriers that TxDOT built. And they would just drop because they had no support in the wind when they were flying, because it's all turbulent. They'd hit the road and they'd get run over. A lot of people go out and they have a group now that is on call when we have a norther hit. TxDOT went out and modified the bridge, and they reduced a lot of the pelicans that were dropping out, but there's still a few that fall out of the sky. I think last year they may have saved 50 of them, and I'm not sure about that, but they've reduced the mortality. Pelicans are not endangered, so it's tough to get much done for them, but we have a lot of volunteers going out and helping. These are some of the organizations that were involved in restoring the Bahia Grande. And how to get a picture of Ed in there? That's another thing I guess I could mention now. The Ecotourism Center has an overlook looking over the Bahia Grande. And I may have another slide on that later on too. This one shows, one thing, this reminded me of something. Not only do we have tourists that are available to go into the ecotourism center and look at Bahia Grande, people from Mexico like to come here too, especially during Holy Week. And that'll be a big attraction for the ecotourism center, and a boom for tourism at Bahia Grande. We don't have public access yet, and we're hoping for it. Fish and Wildlife has been extremely resistant to it. I guess they don't want us trashing it. You know, when we let people into anything, it's tough keeping up after them. Here's some of the facts. 10,000 acres were degraded wetlands, and this was written, I guess, just before we restored it. 21,763 acres of habitat. This is Carl Joe Gaiman. He was the guy that he's the godfather of Bahia Grande. And this was the first ditch. I showed you a picture of that. And this is Wally Reed. He was a rancher. He was involved in it. He used to have to haul water out to provide for his cattle. I don't even know if he's around anymore. You can see some of the dust that came off Bahia Grande. And there were warning signs. There still are warning signs on Highway 48, not from Bahia Grande, but from a place called Vadia Ancha. And I did mention that earlier. They want to make a cut through there, and I think they should, so they can reduce some of the dust. We even had kids planting mangroves out there. And if you drive across Bahia Grande, if you're coming from Port Isabel and you cross the bridge, look to the right, just before you get to what they call the Yellow Gate, or you just get almost past Bahia Grande. If you look down, you'll see that the mangroves have established themselves. When they first started them, you can see these kids, they're planting one mangrove in one place. Mangroves don't like being by themselves, we found out. We found out that if you plant several of them together, they're colonial and they like being together and they grow like crazy. It's something we learned from planting them in the Bahia Grande. Some of the things that you see out there, the only horny toad I've seen in the valley was there at Bahia Grande. I couldn't believe it because I used to play with them as kids when I lived in Mineral Wells. And I think Ed said there's some in Port Isabel now. I mentioned redhead ducks. They used to hunt them when they crossed the Redhead Ridge. It's named after that, coming from between San Martin and the Bahia Grande. We also have nilgai out there, and that's an Indian antelope. There are so many of them, they have to get rid of them because they carry the fever tick. And if we get the fever tick in Texas, we can lose all of our cattle, or quite a few of them anyway. So that is controlled. They do have some hunts for them out there, but they can't get them all. They just keep coming back. And now they're even raising cattle on the Laguna Atascosa Wildlife Refuge as an early warning for all the other cattle to the north of us. And that is historic for Fish and Wildlife to be raising cattle. You think of them as looking after wildlife, but they're not. These are some of the other things they want to do. Hiking and biking, they're pushing to have the biking trails near there or passing by there and even going into it. But there's been some resistance, and we need to work on that. This is some of the algal flats right here that I mentioned earlier when it would dry up. That is really nutritious stuff. A lot of insects feed on it, and when it does get flooded, it provides a lot of nutrition for a lot of small fish and even insects. And I'll show you an insect that was found in there when they first started studying. The upper reaches are very high salinity because it's very shallow and has an extremely high evaporation rate.
Hey, Tony.
Yeah.
Ed had a comment.
Okay.
He said one of the most popular requests from visitors at the Ecotourism Center is wondering if they can see the nilgai.
They can if they look hard enough. I've hunted nilgai, and they're very tough to. You can see them from a distance. Getting close to them is really hard. You'd have to. You'd probably have to go in there. I'm sure they could see them from your overlook, Ed, if they just scan it and scan it. I've seen them. I've driven through there. If we get a tour, I'll go with you, and I can spot them usually when they're running.
Michelle Cano said she saw one last week and took a photo from the deck. But
Oh, good for you, Michelle.
She
That's
has
great.
a honking huge lens too.
Wow.
So she wasn't just like, it wasn't her naked eye, right, Michelle?
They're beautiful. They're beautiful animals.
No, I saw it. I was looking through the binoculars first, and I saw it when I was going up what is that? The bridge or something, right? That deck,
The overlook.
The overlook, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was to the left, and it was pretty funny that I saw it there, and I could see a hunter way in the background wearing an orange vest, but I guess he never saw it. He was far back. I was like, well, you need to come over here to this place and you can spot them better. But yeah,
that's funny.
It was
they are really they're tasty. They're low in fat, and they don't have any chemicals or anything in them. So if you ever get a chance to eat nilgai, try it. The bulls are a little strong tasting. The younger ones and the cows are the better ones to eat. And like I say, I prefer nilgai over venison.
Interesting.
I've heard a lot of people say that.
Yeah, I wish we could have open season on them out there all the time, because I would take advantage of it. So here's what it looks like now. You see this blue line? That is the that is the supply canal that comes off the Brownsville Ship Channel. And then Laguna Larga is connected. They actually had to move one of these canals because they found a fishing camp. I think, did I mention the fishing camp earlier? Where they dug up, yeah, I did, I think. They found an arrowhead, a lot of fish ear bones. Fish ear bones are tough. They last a long time. And the camp was 5,000 years old. In fact, when it was private land, I was walking in this area here, and a friend of mine looked down. We were on the edge, and she found an arrowhead herself. Really, people have lived there for a lot longer than we've been around here. So some of the things that went on, they had land transfers, hydrological surveys, archaeological. We grew the plants that we wanted to plant out there. Army Corps of Engineers, TxDOT. Joe Gaiman he's the godfather of Bahia Grande. We had research, lots of research, interior channel construction. If anybody remember a guy, an outdoor reporter, his name was Steve Walker. He was reporting, I guess, out of Brownsville years ago. He was instrumental in putting down the netting that kept those interior channels stable. And then just lots and lots of different people doing different things. In July 2005, they opened it up, and people paid attention to it. It's quite a project. Here it is. You can see the water flooding in. And then the birds were there right away. I heard stories when they dug the Brownsville Ship Channel that the fish were following the dredge as it moved in. The reason we have the Brownsville Ship Channel, Don Hockaday, whose father was a doctor in Port Isabel for a long time, said that Port Isabel did not want a big port like the Port of Brownsville. So the Port of Brownsville said, okay, we'll dig the channel there. Ed, you could probably verify that. But that's what Hockaday told me, and makes an interesting story anyway. This picture was taken by a guy, I think he's passed away now. It's Richard, I forget his last name. It's one of the first pictures that we had of an overflight of the channel, the second channel that was dug. And these are some more of the interior channels. I mentioned they wanted to bring some water from San Martin, but they've just they're not doing that, and they would like to bring in water from the north side because the salinity still gets high. The channel that they're digging right now, they've come up to the bridge and they're widening it to 150 or 200 feet. And I think it's a depth of 15 feet. So it's going to give us more tidal, I guess, exchange in there, and hopefully reduce salinity and provide even more habitat. Right now, there's a lot of seagrass growing in it, and there's oysters. It's phenomenal. So the 48 expansion was figured to cost like $3 million. TxDOT already put that in there. There's been baseline monitoring going on. And revegetation, it's worked very well. Here's one of the project areas. I mentioned the gates earlier. The red gate is on this side, and I think that's where they're going to let visitors in, hopefully soon. We've been waiting since since 2006 when they promised we could go in there. And here's the yellow gate. That's along this southwestern side here. And the rocks are up in this area here, I think, that I showed you, that the Bahia Grande rocks. This was proposed, but it's happening now. I think they moved this parking lot further to the left. And this particular peninsula is eroding away. They say that they're going to put some stubble around it to keep it from erosion from happening. Anytime we get a strong norther and high tides, it erodes. And it's a tough call, but we need to protect it. There's rattlesnakes in there too, so don't ever try to walk in there. Bahia Ancha, I mentioned that earlier. I guess they used to walk from Port Isabel or Brownsville and cross over this way. Before the ship channel was there, they could walk onto an area they called Jackass Flats and go over to the Boca Chica or Brazos Island side. But they can't do that because of the Brownsville ship channel now. But this is a big source of dust for the Highway 48, and a lot of accidents can have happened there, I guess, from the blowing dust. They want you to slow down, and I think it's a good idea because it'll go into Little Laguna Madre, and Little Laguna Madre now has canals or channels that provide water to the larger Bahia Grande area. This is Port Isabel right here. And this was the pilot channel that they had early on, and this is the one that they're constructing now. I think it's even wider than this, maybe 200 feet wide. And I've got too many maps of these different areas, I guess. Another look at the Bahia Grande complex. It is managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And before I said that a lot of people were interested in it, different agencies, different private organizations, and people still want access to it, and we need to push for it. We've won a lot of awards with this. And then I had to take a picture. I was with Richard Moore one day and we went out and I saw this. I thought it was a bug that was stuck on a yucca, but it's not. It's a fiddler crab, and it's a loggerhead shrike does that when they catch something. They'll stick it onto a yucca, and they always have food around. And I mentioned that they found a new beetle in the northern reaches of it. It's called Barosis, and I want to see one of these stuck on one of the yuccas as food for the loggerhead shrike. But they had never found anything like this in a high salinity environment. And this is a beetle that occurs worldwide, and it's a scavenger beetle. But the shrike is really a cool bird because it sticks its food onto anything that's sharp. They'll even do it on barbed wire. I love taking pictures of different vistas out there. This is Bird Island in the distance. More fish skulls. Bird Island again in the background with the trestle. And Richard Moore, he just produced a video on Bahia Grande, and it's available through the Friends of Laguna Atascosa. I wanted to show it tonight, but I left it in Port Isabel, so I'm sorry. Maybe we can do it some other time, or buy a copy of it. Look up Friends of Laguna Atascosa online, and they've got the video for sale. I think it's like $15, not very expensive. And it's an amazing story. He tells it better than I do. This is a yucca forest. It's something that you don't see in other places. It's out there. There's Ed again. I like that ecotourism center. The tour that the class made of it, that was just totally amazing. Ed, thank you for taking the job. You're the right person for it, I believe. So this is some information. Where am I, Barbara? I've got more time.
It's only 8:33.
One of my interns put this together. His name's Shadrach Villafranca. And he spent last summer with me learning how to check turtle excluder devices and bycatch reduction devices on shrimp boats. He had never been on a boat before. Guess where he is now? He's in the Bering Sea on a stern trawler fishing for pollock. Bering Sea, a calm day is like 35-mile-an-hour winds, 10-foot seas, and it's extremely cold over there because it's up north. And
that's crazy.
He's tough.
He was in the
He's
last
a master
class.
Naturalist.
Yeah. He was in the last class. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So we train him and we let him loose, and so he's out there. So he put this together on using Landsat data, and I guess we can do this too. I haven't looked at it that much, but he just covers a little bit of the background on the Bahia Grande. He said one of the things that this struck me, he said, while improving the circulation system, it still remains unlike that of its former ecology. Who knows? He's probably right there, because it's changed through its whole, I guess, lifetime. I think maybe when they had fishing camps there, it probably held water for long periods of time. And they must have been there maybe in the springtime, maybe in the fall. Fall is usually the best fishing time that we have around here, so it could have been then. But the natives, they usually, the Quahiltecans, I cannot say that word very well. They followed the blooms of the cactus, the tunas that they produce. So, and those are usually in the springtime. So they were probably chasing cactus around them then, and maybe came over here during the fall. So he looks at some of the different areas and looks at the channels and the changes that we've seen over time. These are all from Landsat. And he even gives us, I think he gives us a site to go to where we can do that. This is really unique. you can see the delta that formed primarily from the incoming tides. Before they built the channel, we thought that it might provide a lot of silt into the ship channel and cause the need for dredging, but no, it put most of the material on this side, and they're going to have to dredge quite a bit of this out for this new channel. This is the intermediate channel that was dug in 2005. This is the one that we had, I think this may have been the scar of the one that Gaiman dug. And these were just, that's where the culverts were underneath Highway 48. And some more information on using Landsat. San Martin talks about the fresh water, half meter in depth. Gulf of Mexico talks about the tidal patterns. We have two tides and then we have mixed tides. And they say, I've heard that's because of Cuba in the Gulf of Mexico, or affecting tides in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm not too sure about that though. And then here's some more information, currents. Talking about visible currents, you can see water movement from these Landsat pictures. And oh, these are vegetation. There's a lot of seagrass out there now. And so that drives the ecosystem. That's the basis of it. So accessible to hunters during the season. It's a drawing when you apply to hunt out there. I've done it before, never gotten drawn to hunt at Bahia Grande. And then he found some areas that had marks in them or something was moving around. It could have been, who knows, maybe someone had a boat out, a boat motor out there and made that. And that is a problem in the Laguna Madre, outboard motors. When people go across seagrass beds, it takes like almost a year for them to recover from the scars that they make. I think he traced the tracks there on it. This is the delineation of the area where you can fish. You can fish inside here, north of Highway 48, but no access further than that. If you go out there, they'll kick you out. So it just compares then and now. And I'm not going to read all this. I don't like reading. This is what it looked like during the freeze. He plotted some of the temperatures and looked at some more Landsat data. And here's the freeze moving out of the valley on the 19th of February last year. Here's where you can go, I think, earthexplorer.usgs.gov/ if you want to access Landsat data. I'm going to try it. I haven't tried it yet. I didn't have a chance, but I'll take a look at it. And then Wonderground, you can get a history of the weather, what's gone on. That's a good link there. Wonderground.com/history/Brownsville/K-bro/date/2. Well, that was the dates he was looking for. So you can put the date that you're looking for after that. Does anybody need me to leave that on longer? Everybody good with it? Barbara?
Yep, because they can go back and.
Oh yeah, they'll be able to watch it. Shouldn't even be
Yeah.
reading it, sorry.
Yeah.
Here are some of the sources of the information that we got. Dr. Rahman at UTRGV. And then that's it. I'm paddling or I'm rowing toward Bahia Grande down the Brownsville Ship Channel. I don't know, how long did I talk?
Oh,
Long enough.
let's see, you started at 7:20.
Okay.
Okay,
Well, we
perfect.
got 10 more minutes then? I don't want to,
Yeah.
I could do on the, I don't
You're
want to
good.
go anymore. My voice is starting to.
You're good. Hey,
Okay.
anybody got questions for Tony? He's lived this for how long did you guys say? 22 years? The committee was working on this? All
At
those
least.
partners?
Yeah, we've waited too long. Too long.
Yeah.